Hello, and welcome to the Exponential Potential podcast. And this month, we're diving deep into possibility and inspiration. And today's episode is no exception at all. Our focus today is on unlocking the hidden strengths of introverts and uncovering how quiet power can create extraordinary impact even in uncertain times. And I think that, this conversation around introverts is we kind of often leave introverts out from these big bang possibility and excitement type of conversations. And it's like there's room for introverts here. So I am thrilled to welcome Sharissa Sebastian Deppen. Hey, Sharissa. It's great to have you here because, guys, Sharissa's a leader and a coach who specializes in empowering introverted women to break through barriers and embrace their unique genius, that quiet genius. And Sharissa brings years of experience coaching Fortune 100 leaders, speaking on global stages like TEDx, shaping the next generation of leadership. We have to try not to completely geek out, but I am like so excited. I'm so excited to have a good old deep leadership conversation. You're here though in your zone of genius, which is around how introverts can transform uncertainty into opportunity, leading with purpose and grace, and kind of leading into those superpowers. So you don't have to be an introvert to get a lot from this episode. But actually, there's a lot that extroverts can learn to better understand other people's quiet brilliance. Yeah, and if you're an introvert, all the more. Let's inspire you about new opportunities, new possibilities, and let's explore how we can help you thrive even in these uncertain times. So, Larissa, hey.
You did such a brilliant job. I love that introduction, and I love the whole theme of possibility and potential and just inspiration.
Yeah.
Who doesn't need more of that, right?
Oh, for sure, for sure. And we had a really yummy warm-up conversation. It's a few weeks now in preparation. And in terms of this aspect of introverted leadership, we covered our own unique journeys to this point. And it makes me laugh now that I'm like very old. But it makes me laugh when I talk to my mentee and she says, Claire, you can talk on stage, you talk to camera. It's like I've not always been this person at all. And I've often been at the beginning of my journey really quite introverted in my approach. So this is something that you can work with for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you're talking about this because introverts, a lot of times people have a misconception about introverts. Even introverts themselves feel like, okay, if I don't really feel comfortable taking the stage, or I don't feel comfortable being in the spotlight or being interviewed or any of those things. And that's not necessarily true of introverts. It doesn't mean that they don't like to do that. They just do it in a slightly different way. And it's possible to do that in a way that, feels good to introverts. And I'll speak as an introvert myself, where it doesn't feel like you're trying to be someone you're not. And so that's why I'm so passionate about the work that I'm doing, because there's so many misconceptions. And also there's so many opportunities that introverts have to really step up in a way that feels good to them, rather than them comparing themselves to other people and coming from that place, which really drains our energy, right? And also just takes away our confidence when we're constantly comparing and falling into that comparison trap. So I love that you talked about the speaking and all of these other things that most people typically don't associate with introverts wanting to do those things, or doing it. But at the same time, there is so many opportunities there that introverts can embrace. And yeah, it's just about that synergy too, right? Of that playing together between introverts and extroverts. So
And I'm so excited that we're in 2025 when this goes to air. I'm so excited because there is so much discussion around diversity, and from a DEI perspective, you think about gender, you think about ethnicity, you think about all the physical attributes. You might consider neurodiversity, and actually, I feel like we're moving to an age of acceptance and celebration and kind of really understanding that so many people bring different aspects of their personality and preferences to the fore. So this is a real time where introverts can stand up and say, hey, this is me. This is
Yeah,
how I roll. I'm not shy. I'm
that's right.
not retiring.
Yeah.
I'm not quiet. I'm not, it's not that I'm not assertive. I'm here. I'm listening. Give me space. Give me space.
Yeah, that so resonates with me. And I love that you brought up the word space because introverts need that space, right? To be able to thrive, to be able to really function optimally. So I can't wait to dive into the conversation today about different aspects of that and what that might look like. But yes, so spot on with
Brilliant.
all of it.
Brilliant. So let's tee up the questions. So in your mind, in the work that you do as well, or feel free to bring examples. Yeah, how can introverts turn uncertainty into a source of growth and possibility rather than fear or hesitation?
Oh, that's such a good question. So there's so much to unpack in here. But there's a couple of points that I want to share that I think are going to be really, really helpful to whoever's listening, especially from an introverted perspective. And so the first thing I want to mention here is it's so important. It doesn't even matter whether you're an introvert or extrovert or whatever it is, but to know yourself, know who you are, know your strengths, know the things that you're passionate about, the things that drive you, the things that motivate you, like what does meaningful work mean to you, like all of these things. And this is something in my coaching practice that I call your leadership zone of genius. So from a leadership perspective, what makes you unique? What is that unique value that you bring to the world? Because when you are so grounded in that, you have so much more confidence, right? You step into the world in a sense of confidence and you take up your space, right? You have that level of presence that people are attracted to. So I would say the first thing, especially when we live in a world that's very uncertain, right? There's so much that's out of our control. So in order to really function optimally, one of the things we have to start with is knowing ourselves well, knowing how to play to our strengths, knowing how we engage with other people. And the other thing I want to address just really quickly here is the reason I focus on introverts is not necessarily to label anyone or to say, okay, you have to fit into this box or that box. It's more just to create self-awareness. So introverts are, they tend to be a little bit, maybe a little bit quieter at times, but that's only because they're very introspective. We take in a lot of information from our external environment. We're really good listeners, typically speaking. And so we need that time to internally process what's going on before we, engage in conversation or engage in any way with other people. And so it's not that's just a natural tendency. It's not to say that you can't, it's not to generalize at all. So I wanted to make sure I mention that. And then the second thing is, as far as just being resilient, right? We're talking about uncertainty and all of those things, is leaning into those strengths. So when you know what your strengths are, what makes you unique, even those qualities that make you an introvert, knowing how to play to those strengths in times of uncertainty is going to be incredibly important, especially because if I'm speaking to leaders, and this doesn't mean that you have to have a leadership title, but we all lead in some way, right? We probably don't realize this, but there's people that are looking up to us. It could be kids, it could be, whoever, but taking that role to say, okay, I'm going to lead, or I'm going to lead myself in a way that's going to help me be resilient, means you have to know your strengths and how to play to those strengths in those times that are uncertain, that are, that are just there's a lot that's out of our control. But what we can control is our thoughts, our beliefs, how we show up, and we can choose how we respond and react in those situations. And then the third thing, sorry, I'll pause there.
I'm just like, oh, so excited. Oh, but kind of, I love that you're talking about this zone of genius and knowing yourself, because yes, that evolves and grows, but actually, kind of so often we go through this leadership growth and development. We do that within the frame of an organization and within a job title. And so we go, well, we must be that kind of leader because that kind of organization, that kind of business wants that kind of leader. And we don't tap into our true power when you do that. And so I've just got to celebrate the concept of, your unique zone of genius, because it is
Yeah.
absolutely vital. So
Yeah.
sorry, go on.
Oh, this is perfect. And I love that you brought that up because there is benefit to number one knowing that, but that doesn't mean that you can't align with the expectations of your role. So that's a whole other topic that we can touch on today too. But yes, absolutely knowing that as you step into whatever role that you're playing, whether it's inside of work or outside of work, is going to be really important. And then the other thing is knowing your values, making values-based decisions. I can't begin to tell you what a life changer this was for me, when it took away so much stress when I could really be clear on my values, the things that are really important to me. and make decisions, even within the workspace, make decisions from that place of like, okay, what do I value? What are the most important things to me? And then how do I make a decision that align with the things that are important to me? So for example, my values happen to be, most of them start with F, which is very interesting. So my values are things like faith and family and fun and freedom and those kinds of things. So looking at whatever decision I needed to make, especially when you navigate uncertainty and there's things that are coming at us all the time, right? Unexpected things that we have to deal with. How do you align how you show up and the decision that you're making in those moments with the things that are important to you, the values, the things that you hold dear to you? So knowing those values and knowing how to make values-based decisions so that no matter what the circumstance, if you make a decision, you're okay with walking away knowing no matter the outcome, you did the very best that you could at that particular point in time, and you can have that peace. And then the last thing I'll touch on here is your identity, right? That belief system, your mindset is critical because how you view the world is what you're going to experience internally. So what I mean by that is if you have a belief system that you're not good enough, or because you're an introvert, you're not as good as somebody else that might, show up in the world in a different way, that is going to impact how you show up. That's going to impact your confidence, how you feel, and all of that. So if you have a strong identity in who you are, what makes you unique, kind of going back to that zone of genius, and you can say, okay, no matter what happens, I'm going to show up confident in who I am, what I believe in, and I'm going to have a belief system that helps me to align with that rather than detracts from it. It just makes you so much more powerful and more resilient in the times where you do face uncertainty.
Yeah. And I really want to underline, that point, especially because that was part of my superpower is that, I was a rapid riser and I would be in these meetings with really important people and kind of there'd be a lot of bluff and a lot of charisma around the table and strong voices. And I was kind of naturally somebody that would reflect and listen. And sometimes I didn't know quite when to interject. But actually, my superpower was observing these dynamics and observing the little holes in the logic that were coming through and kind of having a quiet word with the chair or, meeting outside and saying, did you notice that? Did you ask that question? This is where it might come through. And again, for so many of the people around the table, they would be paying a different power play of, posturing. So I'd be unnoticed a lot of the time, but actually unnoticed and yet super valuable to the chair, in terms of, right, come on, how are we going to manage this meeting? What does this look like? How can we get the most from everybody?
That's exactly right. And I love that you just gave such a beautiful example of quiet strength, how your strengths in those moments can really shine. And it doesn't mean that you have to have the floor in order to shine, right? You don't have to be the loudest voice in the room. But there's other ways that introverts can really have an impact. Because I think introverts we put a lot of pressure on ourselves in those moments to talk, right? Because we hear the feedback that, we want you to be more visible. We want to hear more from you and all of those kinds of things. And so sometimes we can put a lot of pressure on ourselves to speak up in those moments, to interject, to do things like that. But there's other ways of going about doing that where you can still have impact, but you don't have to feel this internal pressure of, okay, now I have to, find a way to speak up in the meeting. So I love what you talked about, like taking in all of that information, processing through it, and then finding those, those moments to either, say something or ask for clarification, whatever it is, to add value in that meeting. But there's also other ways of going about that, like relationship building, right? So my guess is in that example that you gave is that you had a relationship with the chair and they knew that, because you did have that relationship and you had that communication, all of that, they knew the value that you could provide. So that when you came to them and said, and did you notice this? And did you know this? They're like, they sit up and take notice. Oh, okay, I want to hear more from Tia. That's an interesting observation, right? So the relationship building is also really important. So I love that example. Thank you.
For sure. So let's look into this a bit more and kind of from your perspective, what are some untapped strengths then that introverts bring to moments of challenge, moments of change to create possibility?
Oh, that's so good. Yeah, so there's a couple of them that I want to highlight, and there's so many more that we could go into. But in the interest of time, there's just a few that that I think would be really valuable to embrace as an introvert. So we already touched on some of them. So the active listening, the introspection, right? The fact that introverts tend to really take the time to see what's going on. They a lot of times will pick up on the nonverbal cues, right? So what's going on in an environment, what's going on in the room, how are people showing up, even when they, what are they saying, and what is their body language saying, and all of these different like nuances that some other people may not necessarily pick up on as easily. And they're very good at being engaged in active listening. So that's another part of that, right? So really being intent in listening and trying to understand what's being said and why and those kinds of things. And they ask really good questions a lot of times because they are curious. They have that natural curiosity. And so that's something that comes into play as well. And then, of course, empathy. So introverts often have a deep understanding and want to know, like even on an emotional level, how people are showing up. Are you okay? Checking in, making sure that they're trying to understand from that empathetic standpoint as well, where people are coming from. And of course, that makes it so powerful because when there is an opportunity to interject or to have a voice and to say something or ask a question, they're coming at it from a level of understanding that maybe some other people may not have. So that's definitely a superpower, that ability to take things in, even though it might seem like it slows down the process a little bit because you are taking that time to absorb and to make sense of things. But when you do speak up, and this is something I always tell my introverts to be encouraged by, I can't tell you how many times I've heard this, that when introverts speak up, people sit up and pay attention. So even though you might not be the one that's the most vocal in the room or anything like that, but when you do speak, people are going to pay attention because the introverts, typically speaking, are not the most boisterous and all of that. So when you speak, people tend to lean in and want to hear, okay, what do you have to say? And a lot of times they really value it because they know it's very thoughtful and you've taken the time to process and to be very intentional about what you're saying and how you're saying it. So remember that that's another superpower. You're very reflective as an introvert generally. You're reflecting on, what's going on and the environment. And then they're also, one-on-one interactions. The introverts do really well. And so it's kind of going back to what we're talking about with relationship building. They're really good at that because they are engaged in that conversation. They want to get to know people. They're curious. And they want to know how can they serve. And that service also comes through in that way as well. So those are some of the top I guess the characteristics of introverts in general. And if you're an extrovert listening, those are some ways that you can pick up on who the introverts are around you and give them the space to be able to function at their optimal, and so that give them the space to think, to get the information ahead of time, to process through some of the things that are going on, so that when they do, when they do contribute to the conversation, they have something that is really of value that people can take away and learn from and get from that whole interaction.
And I've got to say, at the moment, when you say an introvert might slow things down, actually, that's really, really important. Everything is moving so fast in the world. The latest technology comes out, and then there's a new iteration, then there's an election, and there's a shift here and a shift there and a shift there. And so what I observe is many businesses kind of scrambling and rushing in order to get to market or in order to improve.
Mm-hmm.
And that's fair enough. But actually, I think there's a real call at the moment for smarter thinking, not just faster thinking. And I think there's, where you are dealing with people who are introverts who consider more deeply the issues rather than kind of the superficial responses. You really want to grab those ideas, those inputs, and really run with them because there's genuine novelty and also sustainability in what they have to offer.
100%. And that's such a good point, is that the ability to slow things down to the point where, you're able to make a better decision or navigate, your team or your group to making the best possible decision is a superpower, right? Your ability to kind of slow things down and say, wait a second, before we rush into the next thing, before we rush into making a decision, into making a bigger commitment with time and whatever it is, let's slow things down enough so we're asking the right questions, so we're getting the right information, so that when we do make that decision, it has the best possible ability to have a positive impact rather than the risk really outweighing the impacts in those situations. So I love that you brought that up because it really is a superpower. And sometimes we minimize that, right? We think, oh, we have to go faster because everyone else requires us to go faster, when really it can end up hurting us rather than helping us. Not even just as individuals, but in terms of the team and business decisions and all of those kinds of things. So there's really a lot of benefit in slowing down just enough to be able to make better informed decisions. Yeah.
Yes, for sure. So what advice would you give to introverted women who feel stuck? Either there's kind of a high pressure situation or they're battling with self-doubt. What advice would you give to them?
So the first thing I would say is be proactive with taking care of yourself. This is incredibly important for introverts because introverts get energy by being by themselves, not necessarily like isolating from everybody, but just having the space to be able to decompress, to be able to, fill their cup so that they can then go out and engage with others and be effective, in the workplace and even just in their families and different things like that. So take care of yourself, know yourself enough to know that the things that really energize you, the things that, are going to help you to rest and recharge, because introverts function best when they are in that completely fully charged, mode where their cup is full and then they can pour out of a full cup rather than draining themselves, because it can be draining for an introvert to constantly be engaged with others, to be at such a fast pace and not give themselves enough time to rest and recharge. So the number one thing I always tell my introverts is make sure you are proactive in creating healthy habits, taking care of your mental well-being, emotional well-being, spiritual well-being, relational well-being. All of those things are so key and important. And a lot of that comes down to just creating healthy habits, creating those rhythms in your life so that when the uncertainty comes, when the stress comes, you are much more able to stay focused, to stay present, to stay calm, so that you can address that in the most beneficial way. So I would say the one thing is take care of yourself. The second thing is what we already touched on. So know yourself really well, know your strengths, know what you need in those given moments. Be really observant. Like, we're really good at observing others and observing our environments, but also be introspective with yourself and know yourself well enough to know what are your strengths, where are the areas where you really do need that support. You need maybe extra rest, or you need support from others around you to be able to help you to navigate that. So really know yourself well enough and know where you can lean into support that you have around you. So build up that level of support, whether that's through people, whether you have a coach or a mentor or whatever it is that fits under that in the bucket of support, so that you can be the very best that you can be. And then the other thing we talked about earlier is just be really mindful of what's going on in your mind, because your belief system, your thoughts really drive the experience that you have. So, and also one example of this is what I call the comparison trap. Be very careful about comparing yourself to others and saying, oh, I should be doing this, or I should be doing that, or that person does it so much better than me. Because the minute you do that, you detract from who you are and the unique ability that you have to step into a given situation and do the very best that you can. So your belief system and your thoughts are so critical to how you experience life, and also the level of stress that you have as well, right? So if you have a positive belief system that really plays well to your strengths and helps you be more confident, that's just going to help you navigate any situation in a much better way than if you're comparing yourself to others. So I would say, in terms of if you're feeling stuck, or if you find yourself in that in self-doubt or anything like that, go to these three things, well, actually it's four things. Take care of yourself, know yourself really well, be careful of your thoughts and beliefs, make sure that you're mindful of what's going on in your mind. And then the other thing is your support is so important, your support system, having those key people in your life that can help and support you. And I would definitely encourage you to get a coach, because a coach is going to help you and it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be me, but find somebody that can help you get a different perspective on who you are and how you're showing up, so that you can be more confident in who you are from that perspective. So I would definitely say those four things are really critical when it comes to helping introverts, but also extroverts in general, to navigate these areas of self-doubt, uncertainty, all of those different things.
And I'm curious, so we've talked about extroverted leaders, for example, here, and I'm curious about how can leaders create environments where introverts feel inspired, they feel safe to share their ideas and step into their potential, and not just within a workplace environment, but people may have really close friends or family relationships.
Right.
Like this is the other one, is kind of generally you might have one who's really loud and one who's really quiet. How do you create space that the introverts can thrive in any setting?
Oh, that's so good. And I love the word space. I love that you're using that particular term, because I think introverts really lean into that, right? So when we hear, or at least me as an introvert, when I hear the word space, like I can breathe. I can feel like I'm not so rushed. I'm not so, that kind of thing. So just in general, when it comes to creating space, for introverts, one is introverts tend to want to be as prepared as possible in a given situation. So what I mean by that is, if you're, say you're, I'll use a work setting as an example. If you are creating a meeting, for example, and there's going to be introverts in that meeting, giving them time to prepare, to plan, to get mentally ready for whatever it is that is going to be expected of them in that setting is going to be incredibly important. This can go for family as well. But making sure that they have what they need so that they can adequately prepare for how, what the expectation is of them showing up is going to be really important. So whatever information that is, whatever that is. And then for introverts in that situation, don't hesitate to advocate for what you need. Ask for what you need, right? So if there's a meeting, if there's even a social setting that you're going to, and if you feel like, oh, it would be really helpful if I knew X, Y, and Z, so, certain information, or, even just simple things, right? Like a dress code. Am I supposed to bring something to this event? Things like that, to prepare and create that space for you so that you have the ability to adequately, not just physically prepare for it, but also mentally prepare for whatever it is that's happening in that setting. Even just knowing, okay, who's going to be in that environment. All of those kinds of things can be really helpful. So I would say that planning and preparation give your introverts that, that ability to do that is going to be really key to helping them feel more relaxed when they get into whatever that setting is, and just where they can function at their best. The second thing I would say is, coming back to that idea of creating space, is give them space to be able to think, to introspect, and then give them the option, the ability to be able to have a voice, right? To ask them for their opinion and things like that. It's going to be important for them to know ahead of time that that's the type of situation or conversation, especially in a formal setting like a meeting or something like that, letting them know ahead of time this is the expectation. And then for the introverts to know clearly, what is my role in that setting? What is my role? What is my responsibility? So again, that mental preparation comes in, but also then, because introverts sometimes can be it can be hard for them to be put on the spot, right? If they're like not sure of what's going on, and then somebody calls on them and they're expected to just, respond in the moment, it can be really hard, because they like to take time to absorb and to think about things beforehand. So if they know that that's going to be expected of them, give them a heads up ahead of time to say, okay, this is the type of meeting it is. This is going to be, something that we're going to be kind of going around the table. We want your opinion on X, Y, and Z. And so that way that they know that when they are called upon, they're more ready to be able to respond, but also creating the space. So, asking for their opinion is perfectly fine. Just make sure that you're giving them whatever they need to be able to respond in that moment. And then for the introverts, if you don't know the answer, or if you're not ready to respond, it's perfectly okay to say, can I get back to you on that? I just want some time to think about it. So the introverts don't necessarily need to feel like, just because they're being asked, something is being asked of them on the spot, that they have to respond. You don't. You can. Your response can simply be, I need a little bit more time to process that. Is it okay if I come back, and do that? So I love what you just said about creating space. There's so much that goes into that. And then two other, or actually just one other thing that I want to touch on, is this idea of psychological safety. Creating environments for, it's both introverts and extroverts that thrive in an environment of psychological safety. So what I mean by that is giving them space to just be themselves, to come in, to have a voice, to have an opinion, so to not to not be judgmental or anything like that, to create a safe space so people feel like they can share and they're not going to be wronged for it, and they don't, they're not going to be judged and things like that. So, and that goes, like I said, for both introverts and extroverts. But I think anyone who is going to be, in that environment with several different people, chances are you're going to be surrounded with both, a mixture of introverts and extroverts. And so you want to make sure that you're creating a psychologically safe space so people are not hesitant to share and to engage in conversation and things like that. So I would say those are the top things that come to mind when it comes to like, how can you really help introverts and also extroverts as well really thrive in those types of situations.
And when you've described putting an introvert on the spot, as it were, also bear in mind that the introvert will replay that over and over again, not necessarily positively. And kind of go, oh, I didn't get a chance to say that, or I didn't get a chance to say that. So check in after, be aware. Actually give some praise and some feedback to encourage and to break some of those internal loops, because I think just naturally the thinking style is that you work it through. You're trying to work out where the extra inch of progress might be. It's that you do need to provide that feedback for sure.
Yes, that's such a good point. I love that you touched on feedback, Claire, because that is so important. And then also, as in addition to providing feedback, introverts can ask for that feedback as well, right? To stop that loop, that internal loop of like, oh, did I say the right thing? How did I come across? Ask people that you trust, right, who were in that meeting and things like that. How did I come across? What did you get from what I communicated in the meeting? And it can be in a one-on-one setting. Obviously, you don't have to do this in a group, but that what happens afterwards, the conversation doesn't have to stop during the meeting, right? There can be engagement after the meeting, so that introverts feel like they still have the ability to have their voice heard, even if they don't have an opportunity there as well. So there's so many different ways to go about doing that. In addition to the feedback, you can still reach out to people after the fact and say, I really wanted to share that. I think I would really want to share this. I think it might be valuable and important. So I'm going to, either type it up in an email, or can we have a quick 15-minute chat about it, because I didn't get an opportunity to do that. So there's ways of going about that where introverts don't have to feel like they only have that little window of opportunity, and then once that window is gone, that's it, right? There's other ways to go about doing that. But I also love what you said about celebrating your introverts, giving positive feedback, right? And saying, oh, I really appreciate that you took the time out of that meeting to do this. Or I really appreciate that you said that in the meeting, or whatever it is, because that encourages introverts, even your extroverts too, but it really encourages that engagement. And so your introvert's going to feel like, oh, wow, okay. So, you took the time to actually acknowledge me and notice my contribution. Now I want to do
Yeah.
more of that.
Well, because extroverts will naturally get that. In the course of a conversation, they'll be feeding, and they'll
Yeah.
be getting the playback. So they'll be getting all the little pats on the back, but the introvert may not necessarily be in that same situation all the time. So
Okay.
that's, yeah, yeah. So I'm going to circle us back for the last question around the topic, which is, this month it's all about inspiration, it's all about possibility. And I just want to open up space. Say, is there a story or an example that you can share that highlights the power of embracing introversion as a strength in leadership or in life?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm going to share a story from my own experience that initially caused me a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety because I was working in a very fast pace. So I used to work in technology. I started off actually as a software engineer, and then moved into technology leadership, where I spent the majority of my corporate career before I transitioned into coaching. And so there was a lot in that space, that technology space, that just wasn't really suited to me as an introvert, or at least I didn't know how to function optimally in that space. It was so fast paced. You had to speak up. You had to be like, there was a lot of pressure. And also, to be fair, there's a lot of pressure that I internally put on myself as well in that situation, because there's a lot of comparison of like, okay, this is moving at such a fast pace. I have to really step it up and I have to engage. And it caused me a lot of stress and overwhelm in those moments. And so also at the same time, towards the end of my corporate career, I was working for a manager who just wasn't a good fit for me, in a lot of different ways. And she also caused, and my team felt a lot of stress from the way she kind of engaged with them and different things like that. So that whole dynamic was just didn't work out, didn't work really well. And I felt like I had to be kind of this middle person who would like protect my team, but at the same time, there was just a lot going on that wasn't, just wasn't a really good fit overall. And so one of the things I did as an introvert is, number one, I was like, okay, well, from how can I really engage in this environment, or how can I create a space, even though I might not have, full authority in the space, but how can I use what I do have to create a positive difference? And also my journey is very much a faith journey. So I was like, okay, God, I don't know what's going on. There's so much that's out of my control. Help me to be a positive influence in the space. And so I started to look at it from a people perspective. So rather than just saying, okay, she's the manager, this is my team, I have to step in and mediate or whatever it is, I started to think about, okay, these are real people. Like, they have lives, there's different things that are going on outside of work that's impacting how they show up. And so I started to have more compassion, and kind of going back to what I talked about, like, introverts tend to naturally have empathy for other people, and they want to support them and help them and things like that. And so I started to look at it through the lens of, okay, she's showing up in this way for a reason. There's got to be something in her past, something that she experienced, something that is causing her to show up in a certain way, and she thinks that's the best possible way to show up, right? We all have these situations, I'm sure, in life where we're like, ooh, if I could go back, I wish I could have done that differently. But we do the best that we can in any given moment. And so I started to say, okay, how can I engage with her on that level? How can I serve? How can I do better at just supporting the person that is very hard to get along with? And so I did that. And honestly, those dynamics started to change. My team started to notice a difference, like, oh, okay, something is different in this environment. And so that really started to help me to see, like, wow, as an introvert, I do have value. I see things that some other people may not see or pick up on. I can actually engage with somebody on a different level, have that level of understanding of where they might be coming from, so that I can be more supportive rather than judgmental, rather than saying, oh, she's like just showing up in a way that I would never do that. It's very easy for us to do that, to compare and say, oh, that's not me, I would never do that. Now I just have to deal with that. But to kind of flip that from an introverted perspective and say, okay, let me be curious about this person. Where's this coming from? What's going on? And how can I support them? Can really change the dynamics. And I also talk about this from the perspective of, if you are a leader listening to me right now, and you have somebody in your family, you have somebody in your team that might be challenging, and it's hard to have that level of understanding. You're like, I don't understand. Why is it so difficult for me to engage with them? just lean in with curiosity, start asking questions, start to get to know them on a human level, because I promise you there's things that you're going to untap there that you would never have known. Lean into that
Mm.
strength of empathy as an introvert and see, how can I best support this person outside of the work, outside of whatever else? How can I just be there for them and see how that changes the dynamics? And so I would say to my introverts who are struggling with some of these relationship dynamics, take care of yourself first. So you want to make sure you're not coming in and just completely stressed and overwhelmed, but take care of yourself. But then also engage in that relational level, which you're so good at anyway, and be curious about your environment and how you're showing up, because I promise you, you can have an impact, even though it might not be. And I'm not saying stay in a toxic environment. That's totally not what I mean, because that's a whole other conversation. And that's not healthy, to try to fix everything, because that's not your role. But you can make a difference based on how you decide to show up, but also you have to take care of yourself in those situations as well.
Yeah, it really opens up the possibility of something different, doesn't
Yes.
it? It's just like a difference in the relationship, a difference in the opportunities. It's
Mhm.
yeah, it's I think it would be easy to understate the impact of that. It's such a powerful shift, really powerful shift,
Yeah.
quite powerful shift. I love that.
That's it.
Ah!
That's exactly it.
So how can our listeners keep following the work that you do? How can they connect in with you if they really resonated today?
Oh, thank you for asking. Well, if you have any questions, if you've listened to our conversation today, you have any questions, you're curious about anything, or even if you're interested in working with me or my team, feel free to email me at info, it's info at leadershipmasteryalliance.com. And also, if you're
Mm.
curious about the type of work that we do and how we do it and the benefits that it could have to you, you can go to leadershipmasteryalliance.com. Also, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. There's a ton of free resources both through LinkedIn and on my website. So yeah, we just love to connect with you and hear from you. So thank you so much. And thank
Oh,
you, Claire, for the opportunity to share that as well. I appreciate it.
oh, thank you for, on behalf of all the listeners today. This is an area that we don't examine often enough, and there's parallels certainly in what we cover in terms of values and self-awareness.
Mm.
But actually, what you've brought home today is a reflection of how much power each of us has
Mm.
and the different ways that we can express that for good. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's brilliant. Let's bring balance, balance in power. So thank you so much for our conversation today. It's been really enriching indeed. And just an opportunity to reflect quite differently on situations and where that might go next, and where people go. So uh, if you're listening now, please don't hesitate to reach out to Sharissa, and if there's freebies, go for the freebies. Go for the freebies.
Oh, yes. There's a free class on navigating uncertainty and rapid change. So free training
Perfect.
on my website.
So we'll have the links in the bio. But for now, thank you so much. It's lovely to see you. Please don't hesitate to share this episode and subscribe. It really does make all the difference to us. But in the meantime, keep being inspired. Keep understanding yourself. Keep tapping into your power. Bye bye.
So that